right? So what happens when the buoyant, coordinated elite warriors in the universe lose absolutely everything that essentially makes them special? Because we are going to be answering that in regards to why the Ginyu Force would probably lose to Tapion in a battle if we actually strip away their powers. It sounds insane, but you have to stick through most of this video in order to actually understand my points. My money is actually on Tapion because, let's be honest, he is a master swordsman who doesn't rely on raw energy for one. The Ginyu Force, on the other hand, primarily relies, almost actually entirely, their power levels rely on mutant gimmicks, right? These weird quirks like Gildo's being able to freeze and then run and then squirm away like a little green blob of, just nonsense. Like, it's so funny. But to prove it, we obviously have to look at the facts. So again, this is happening in, I think, chapter 271 or 270. I think 271 of the original Dragon Ball manga, okay? The original one. Guldo's entire Dragon Ball Z manga. Guldo's entire combat strategy relies on obviously freezing time by holding his breath and using telekinesis, right? Without his power or his ki, he's just a short, again, alien with zero physical conditioning. So if you strip away his psychic abilities, he is instant prey in any environment, any relative harsh environment. Now, if we talk about the other heavy hitters like Raccoon, Birder, and Jace, well, in Daizenshu 7, the Ginyu Force members are actually classified as kind of like special mutants, right, who were born with exceptionally high power levels. So because they were born as natural elites, right, kind of natural special mutant elites, soldiers, they never essentially had to learn survival skills or traditional martial arts skills like the Z Fighters or like most of our hero characters in the show. But let's look at Birder from the Ginyu Force, for example. He calls himself the fastest in the universe, right? A claim highlighted during his fight with Goku in manga chapter 273, I believe, if I'm remembering right. And when you remove his ki, Birder's speed drops to kind of normal biological limits. You take away the super speed he has, he's not moving any faster than any other fighter, right? He is massive, meaning now he requires a massive amount of caloric intake just to survive, but he no longer has the speed to hunt down or defend himself efficiently. So you see, Birder is obviously a pretty big guy, right? I would say he's the second biggest guy in the Ginyu Force, besides Raccoon. Maybe even depending on obviously how they're powering up. It doesn't really matter. But the point is, calories, you need that, and if you don't have that speed that allows you to get around and knock out opponents quickly, that will eventually catch up to Birder. It catches up to anybody who doesn't have proper physical conditioning, which again, I don't think the Ginyu Force actually does, and I think that's just the honest truth in regards to Birder and Guldo. But if we look at Jace and Raccoon is going to rely on that brute durability, right? And that's just him going berserk, more or less, and having stupid stuff to say like Goku. Raccoon is such an idiot, bro. But without his ki enhanced skin that he has to block damage, his reckless fighting style is going to leave him broken and bleeding from basic physical threats. Goku made an easy instant example of Raccoon because he was so much more powerful than him. If you were to actually take the power that Raccoon already had away, yeah, Raccoon, I don't have to say it anymore, right? And if we look at Jace, the other member of the Ginyu Force, well, his signature Crusher Ball technique, it actually completely disappears. It kind of leaves him with no long-range defense because he is kind of another fighter that is, again, relying on a special quirk as a special mutant in order to fight and defend himself. That is the one thing that I think sometimes people forget about the Ginyu Force. They're really not special without their weird, different quirks. And if we talk about the captain himself, Captain Ginyu, well, his ultimate insurance policy is essentially changing entire bodies with others, and that obviously debuted in, I think, the manga back in between chapter 280 and 286 or 7, I think maybe 286, but it's something in there where it's a complex key-based manipulation technique that Ginyu is showing us for the first time. Toriyama's writing that, and essentially without that power, if you strip that away, if Ginyu doesn't have that special manipulation technique that he uses with his ki, he's essentially trapped forever in that base purple form, and unless he does something like Frieza eventually did and he goes through a serious 6 to 7 month training session, he doesn't get any stronger. He is, again, quick pickings for anybody that wants to take something apart from that. So furthermore, in chapter 283 of the DBZ manga as well, Dragon Ball manga, it also proves that Captain Ginyu and the Ginyu Force essentially rely completely on Frieza Force technology. Scouters, in order to obviously find their targets and in order to evaluate the threats, they're not capable of finding their threats, finding their mission targets without having those scouters on them. Like, they're completely incapable of it. They lack the natural sensory perception of tracking, or tracking skills, I should say, that traditional martial artists have. And if you drop the Ginyu Force onto a wild, powerless planet where they don't have any of their special mutant abilities, well, then their teamwork turns into a complete liability because they have massive bodies to feed, they have zero wilderness survival training, limited martial arts training, and their entire identities are essentially built around poses and power levels. And without any true ki, the Ginyu Force crumbles fast. So, yeah, I'm not saying this as a hater of the Ginyu Force. I think they're freaking awesome, but I'm saying, again, if you strip away their power levels, you really have to look at it like they're quite useless, right? You have to think about it. They're a funny gag group of characters, but that's all they would be. Arguably, some people probably still consider them that, even with their power levels. But let's talk about Tapion. Can he actually do any better? Because sometimes in the community, I'll see people that are fans of Tapion, and others that think if you like Tapion, then you're glazing. That's ridiculous. And I promise you, if you look enough, and because I'm a content creator, obviously, like I'm exposed to more things. Most of us are. But regardless, Tapion is someone who's a master swordsman, right? He's going to hold the real advantage when it comes to actually having a formal base martial arts background that he could actually utilize without necessarily needing to have a special mutant quirk, again, like telekinesis or super speed, or, just brute reckless energy like Raccoon, right? And unlike the Frieza Force mutants I've spent the last 6 minutes talking about, Tapion's baseline training is completely different. In the Daizenshuu 6 movie guide, Tapion is explicitly defined as a legendary warrior here, okay? Legendary warrior. Not a normal warrior, not legendary, okay? That's something that most people don't know if you're not obviously reading the Daizenshuu. And he's also labeled as a master swordsman. Okay, those are two things. Nothing necessarily has to insinuate that he has some insane special power, unique ability. He's just a master swordsman. That's his trade, and he's considered a legendary warrior also as a result. So why does this matter? Because swordplay, again, it's a physical, mechanical skill. Even if you strip away Tapion's ki, his muscle memory, his stance, his footwork, his blade accuracy, these all remain entirely intact. And I tell this to people as I coach and do things for sports, that sometimes, even if you're not at the base level or at your prime or at the peak of where you want to be, having the muscle memory, having your fundamentals intact, and being able to really refine those even as you are evolving or getting into a groove, that is an understatement, and it's something that deserves even more attention. We see the depth of the physical training in the movie Wrath of the Dragon, which it's one of the movies I always watch back because it's so niche in a way, out of that collection of about a dozen or so movies that came out during that time, and it's something special about it. Talk about that in another video. But even when Tapion is completely exhausted in that movie and he's like mentally drained, right, from suppressing Hirudegan, his reflexes incredibly sharp, okay, because he doesn't have to rely on those flashy energy blasts that we'll see from most of the characters throughout that movie, and he's really just purely relying on his precision with his sword. You take away his power, a punch from Raccoon becomes useless from the Ginyu Force, right? But a sharp steel blade in the hands of a master, of someone like Tapion, that is completely lethal. He can hunt, he can defend himself, he can clear terrain without needing a single drop of ki. He can make himself faster, he can make himself even more precise. And then if we talk about why this really matters at the core of what makes it work, it's Tapion's mental fortitude. You see, the Ginyu Force, they're really the most pampered athletes in the entire Ginyu Force, or Frieza's Force, I should say, who are going to cry out for whatever they feel like is an injustice, and we saw that during their entire demise one by one during the Planet Namek saga, right? We see Raccoon in chapter 280, I think, of the manga. We see Tapion as someone who's obviously completely opposite of everything that the Ginyu Force represents. Because also, according to the Wrath of Dragon lore, Tapion spent about 1,000 years inside that music box, sealed off, we know that, completely isolated in the dark, carrying the burden of a cosmic demon inside his own body. I don't know what that's like. I don't know if you guys know what that's like, so we'll just go ahead and leave it there. But if you do, feel free to let me know in the comment section below. I'd be interested to see what experience you've had. That requires an unbelievable amount of psychological endurance if you're actually going through that. In a survival situation, the mindset is everything. Your power is only so much if your brain works like at the level of a peanut or at the level of a squirrel, right? You need to make sure you're actually still thinking sharply, making right decisions. While the Ginyu Force would obviously panic, okay, when their scouters and their ki vanish and their tools and, you know, their toys disappear, Tapion, he's a hardened lone survivor and a warrior. He is completely used to isolation. He's used to scarcity. He's used to not having a lot or having anything at all except his weapon. And he's still able to maintain absolute discipline under extreme stress. I think the introduction of his character was a bit overlooked, and people just thought that, oh, okay, this is cool. The flute, you have Kid Trunks and the sword. You have a lot of little things going on in that entire Wrath of the Dragon movie and that timeline, canon or non-canon. And the point is that Tapion was brought in as a warrior that had not been seen in Dragon Ball in a long time, with such absolute discipline and with a story that was different than most because his timeline exceeded the traditional timeline we were used to in Dragon Ball and in Dragon Ball Z. Tapion's timeline, again, in isolation for 1,000 years. Guys, we don't even live past 100 years, okay, or 200, 130 if you're talking about maybe some of the oldest people in the world in history. Tapion was an isolated, okay? I have to reinforce that word. Isolated in extreme stress, under extreme stress, having to maintain discipline, okay? That's the one catch that I think goes over people's heads. When we think about the flute, I think it's useful, and I think it's more important than you may think about initially because it's a mystical, magical melody that's obviously used to suppress the villain, the dragon Harudekan, right? But if we strictly define no power, if we take that out of the equation as losing magical properties, losing the ability to have that type of special thing, the flute just becomes a regular instrument, right? It's just a regular flute if there's nothing mystical or magical about it. Here's the thing though, even without power, Harudekan wouldn't be able to escape or exist Tapion even without the flute. Tapion loses magical defenses, okay, but he still gains the upper advantage of being a master swordsman with ultimate discipline. That is still going to see him through because he's going to have the ability to improvise and to adapt. That is what the best warriors of time have always had the ability to do across anything. They've had the ability to adapt and improvise better than the others. So when you stack all these things side by side, you look at the Ginyu Force, you look at Tapion, and you actually really compare the two. Who is most likely to survive without any gimmicks, any quirks? I think it kind of makes sense. And for the record, I love both. Like I said, there's no bias or preference for me, but again, the Ginyu Force served a purpose, and I think they executed that very well. But if there was ever a time where they were to return and you take away any of their special quirks, they are useless. Like Pan, any of the little kids of the Saiyans from Goku or Vegeta's fam, any one of them would have the power to literally eviscerate any of the Ginyu Force members without question. They surely do now, regardless, but it's like it would really be uncomfortable. So when you look at it that way, the Ginyu Force, they serve a purpose, but they are not the type of soldiers, they're not the type of warriors that have the mental ability to really adapt to long-scale conflict. Tapion survived isolation for 1,000 years. That means he technically has the mental ability, the fortitude, to fight you for as long as more centuries than I can count. So just think about it in that way.